Hello and welcome to the next episode of Kink Tank. Sorry for a little bit of a late start there. I had some bit of technical difficulties on my end, but we are here with three other esteemed panelists here to talk about, yeah, esteemed, I use that loosely. Um, we're going to talk this episode about rough body play. How about that? This
Yay!
is one we've been trying to do for a while. So, kind of along with our play topics, I mean, one of the things that I like to do when we're talking about different kinds of play or the ins and outs of specific acts, I like to talk a little bit about, why. Because there always seems to be, at least from a vanilla perspective, why would anybody do that? Why is rough body play good? Why is it fun? Why is it sexy? Why do you do it? Does it get you off? Does it give you exercise? Does it, you know, what's in it for you?
All of that.
You guys do rough body play?
Before the why?
Well, okay, we could do the what. What are we talking about when we're talking about rough body play? I mean, it's pretty encompassing. To me, it means primal punching and wrestling.
Yeah, pretty much just wrestling, grappling.
Josie?
Yeah.
I agree. I feel like it's a different thing. So like some people maybe get confused about what we're talking about. We talk about rough body play because you can call play rough when you're hitting someone with a flogger, but it's a different thing. To me, it has a completely different energy to it. So like when I'm talking about rough body play, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like takedowns and punching and your whole body is involved, but I feel like both people's whole bodies tend to be involved with that kind of thing.
I agree that when you have implements involved, then we're talking about something else, at least to me. When people say rough body play, I think of two people, and it's not even necessarily an equal match. It's usually just, sort of using your body, using your hands, your fists, your teeth, just sort of whatever you have on your person at the moment, rather than pulling out the toys. Yeah, then we're talking about something else. So we all agree that when we talk about rough body play, that's what we're talking about.
Correct.
Okay. Why do we like it?
Because it's hot.
Yeah, because it's hot. I think there's something to, I mentioned the word primal before. I mean, one of my first exposures to this kind of play was very much a primal thing. It wasn't just rough body play. They would have classified it as a primal scene. This is where, it was two large, hyper-masculine dudes sort of going at it. I mean, where it was almost like caveman grunting noises and sort of ape-like behavior that I saw. And there's a lot of sweat and a lot of close body contact, and I think that's one of the things that they liked about this particular scene. And it was fun to watch. It was something that I hadn't really seen before. You could tell that they were sort of, in a different space than they otherwise would be when they're playing with implements on furniture and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I could see the primal aspect of it, I guess, this sort of idea of, getting back to your roots or devolving for a short period of time, that could be cathartic or mind clearing or
it brings everything down to a very basic level.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what they were getting out of it. I've never sort of had a devolving scene myself where I'm sort of reduced to caveman, but I kind of feel a little bit more like a caveman sometimes when I do this type of thing.
When you're not like using your words, you're not like having a conversation, you're not fucking with your mind. No, none of the parties are like, do you like it when I do this? There's not really any time for that. It's a lot more of like a really visceral, like physical kind of conversation that doesn't involve words. I think that would really take away from it a lot of the time.
There's a lot of cussing.
Well, there could be a lot of cussing. When you step on their toe accidentally, you know, or if somebody, like you think you have them and they sort of reverse you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some cussing there sometimes.
Mhm.
Welcome, Bella.
Hi.
I'm gonna mute Bella till she gets it together.
Well, I like it because it's a lot of back and forth. It's definitely not a one-sided when you're truly into it. Now, we have brought kind of aspects of it into scenes where it's all one-sided, sort of. But usually it's back and forth, and I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's less of a, like, so it's a difference of power exchange. So, like, it's not kind of one person who's top and one person who's bottom. It's very much you just knocked me down, so then I tried to punch you in the face, and that's like a part of it, and that wouldn't be outside the correct, power exchange. That's a part of the back and forth, and that's what makes it fun for me is that you're both involved.
Hmm?
Oh, what about, I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be a question of both. There could be a number of people involved in a rough body play scene.
I've seen that.
Yeah. Or just sort of like a big tag team wrestling match.
It looked like WWE. No chairs, though. Lots of walls being bounced off of, and lots of mats. I think they put mats on any surface they could.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about that too, because I saw a little bit, and I guess you could classify it as a rough body play scene. To me, it looked more like a, sort of an erotic wrestling type of thing that happened in our dungeon space not that long ago. And they said, well, what do you think about us using this space? And I was like, yeah, that looks good. There seemed to be plenty of room. But I didn't realize how much space they were going to, actually occupy. And I saw their heads getting dangerously close to these metal bars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about safety, first of all, in our dungeon space here locally, we have concrete floors. That is not a good thing to do rough body play on.
No.
You will eventually slip or have, your head will smash against the floor and you'll get knocked out or concussed or something worse. So, when you're thinking about doing this type of thing, it has to be pretty well padded, I think. I mean, depending on how intense it's going to get, but it can get pretty, where it starts off sort of, wrestling and sort of throwing each other around, but then everybody's ire gets up a little bit, and then things start to pump and flow a little bit. It can get pretty strong, and it's nice if you kind of plan for that. If you have that, you don't have the china vases too close to the area that you're doing this. If you have a separate room that you can sort of clear out, and lots and lots of padding, not just on the floor, but anywhere else where you might need it. Go ahead, Jamie.
Oh, I was just going to say, you do have to, when you're being involved in this type of play, you need to be space aware on both sides. That way you don't hit your head on walls or concrete floors. I mean, accidents happen, but...
Right. And we're talking about, wrestling and sort of takedown kind of stuff here. Not all kinds of rough body play fall into that. You won't always need a 20 by 20 square foot, area to do this in. Some rough body play scenes that I've seen are actually somebody tied up and helpless. And you could have a lot of fun with that too, and it doesn't go sprawling all the way across the dungeon or anything like that. But have you guys seen that? Like, what are the kinds of things that you see when you're talking about rough body play?
I've seen what you mentioned about with the actual wrestling style. At one of the spaces, they had a room that literally was just that room. And then there's always just more of a localized, where one person's being rough on the other in the middle of a scene. And that's what we do a lot of until I get carried away. But it's...
What does that look like when you get carried away?
Well, a lot of the rough body play for us is when we're playing, it's the key pressure points are involved. The inside of the thigh, the back of the arms, places you really don't want to hit with impact unless,
Mm-hmm.
But, so, it's...
Yeah.
Lots of grappling,
Yeah, grabbing, grappling. It's just
punching.
punching, especially, and punching is something that, in my time in BDSM, I always felt like, slaps were kind of standard, but I
Mhm.
never understood what a fist could do, and learning how to sort of, I guess, punch correctly, for lack of a better term, or punch so you don't knock somebody out or injure them, but you
Uh-huh.
can use that as a big thuddy mallet,
Mhm.
and some people really like that. Sometimes in pretty sensitive places, chest, breasts, even tummy. I mean, you can't go like, Houdini died from a punch to the gut. You can't just go and cold cock somebody like that. Um, you have to be careful of the face, but that doesn't mean you can't play rough with the face or play rough with the head. But, does that include closed fist punching? Well, that depends on your negotiation, I suppose, and what kind of pretty face you need to have the next day.
Yeah, and I think it's very much like a risk-aware thing where, you know, you can get very seriously injured from a lot of things. You just kind of have to figure out what your risk profile is and then kind of what you're comfortable. I have found that, like, especially with punching, when I first started kind of playing with it, I had to learn how to dial it up because neither me or any of my partners that I've tried it with wanted to just start out with like, all right, so I'm just gonna go to as close to 10 as I can go, and you just tell me how bad it is. Like that you don't want to go from the highest to the lowest. You kind of want to
Yeah.
start and see. And I think what I found was that the body is a lot more resilient than you think it is. The places that you think that you can't hit with your closed fist, you absolutely can, and pretty fucking hard without really a lot of consequence to that. Now, I also found out that some parts of your body you will. So, like, I really enjoy punching, and I like it on the meaty parts of my body, like your butt. It's very difficult to really, really hurt your butt. Your butt is
Mhm.
super fatty, whether you have a skinny butt or not. Your butt is just one of those parts of your body that's kind of padded. Your thigh, you can hit a pressure point, but generally speaking, there's not a sensitive organ beneath there that you're worried about, like a kidney. You're not going to hit a kidney. Those are safe parts of the body to kind of experiment with on pressure. But I really like it on my chest. And what I found was that if you pass a certain threshold the next day, you don't breathe so easy. And that'll freak you out the first time you realize it, is that you're like gasping, like you're out of shape, like every time that you're walking. And it scared me kind of the first time because I didn't realize I had passed that threshold. And then I found out kind of where that was, and I didn't really want to go beyond it, but I'm really happy staying in that area. But you
Uh-huh.
just have to learn how to dial it up and dial it back. And obviously, you do want to be careful with this kind of thing, probably even more so than you would with a toy, because there's a lot of force behind a person's hand, no matter how big they are. And me personally, a big draw for this kind of play is I like to do it with people that are bigger than me, I consider to be stronger than me. So, you do maybe want them to know where your actual kidney is. I don't like to get punched directly on my shoulder blade. I find that to be an unpleasant sensation.
Yeah,
I don't.
or a spine, just like go right
Yeah,
for
you
the
want to stay a
spine.
little bit to the side of the spine. I don't like it on my cheekbone. Like, you want someone to have a basic understanding of where your bones are. Um, for me,
Yeah,
but also not
and
like as you're not as fragile as you think that you are.
right. I think that's true. That's something that people, sometimes the safety police sort of get involved. One, because it looks patently um,
Violent.
assaultish, I guess. Yeah, violent.
Violent.
Uh, I didn't really know the word, but it sort of it looks like abuse. It really can at first glance. You're looking at it like, this isn't right, especially when the person's helpless. When it's a two-sided thing and there's a grapple and a roll on the floor and stuff, you kind of feel like, all right, even if that person is a lot smaller than the other person, it's kind of a fair fight, but when one person's like tied up and taking punches from somebody, um, it can seem pretty wrong,
Yeah.
if you're not sure what you're watching. And people
Mhm.
do have a thing about, first of all, anything on the face, which, I'm not saying that most rough body players do anything with the face, because most of them don't. That's not always a safe place. Split a lip, blacken an eye, it's usually no good. And but when you're talking about closed fist stuff, there's just something that really kind of gets people going, and I think it's the same thing that gets the people watching go, oh, like maybe this isn't okay. It might be the same thing that makes the person doing it go, God, this is hot.
I think that's really true.
Because it's a little bit edgy, it's a little bit dangerous, and it is a little bit different when you're doing rough body play than your typical impact scene. I do, in an impact scene, I do use punching, for instance, but it feels a little bit different when I'm doing a rough body play type thing, and I generally don't do extreme stuff. It's not like a big scene where we have to clear off a dungeon space for it or anything like that. It's usually, I would say, probably about a 5 or 6 on the scale. That's where I enjoy it. But my partners can tell when I'm in that mode because there tends to be a lot of snarling and grabbiness and, a little bit of, I don't know, primal energy or something that separates it from when we're doing an impact scene and I decide to use my fists instead of, some other implement. It probably feels different. It's kind of it's definitely a different frame of mind for me.
Yeah.
But people get a little bit freaked out about closed fist stuff because I think it's when you're little, it's like a slap is something that's like not a big deal, or that's what girls do or something. But when you hit somebody with a closed fist, then it's fucking serious,
It's certainly triggery for a lot of people. I think that playing with the idea of fear, though, is a part of rough body play that is very appealing to the people that like it. It is scary, and it's edgy, but it's edgy in a really unique way. I think that fear mixed with that feeling of you definitely shouldn't be punching someone for fun. It's like a taboo thing mixed with the fear of the actual thing coming at you, which is a really scary, awesome kind of a feel. It's a rare kind of a feel. I don't think many people would tell you they're afraid of a snake. There's not a lot of fear that happens there, and also no one's fucking with your mind, really. Nobody's like scaring you that way, like telling you about the boogeyman or, threatening you. You're actually kicking your ass, and that can be really scary.
Yeah, that can be really scary. And for some people, I mean, I understand that, for some people that this is kind of it is a sexual thing. It's a turn on. It's a thing that I imagine I don't know, maybe they watch a lot of Discovery Channel and they watch how, silverback apes do it, and or like if you've ever watched cats or squirrels or something, it's fucking violent. It's really, it's not all that dissimilar than I sort of imagine how a sexual rough body play scene would go, where you're sort of, wrestling the person down and sort of forcing yourself on them. And of course, this is somebody who has consented or agreed to have this done or to participate. We're not talking about actual, forcible actions like this, but it can appear that way. Me, I'm too lazy. I don't like it to be that much work, right?
Well, there's a big difference.
I've seen some rough.
I was just gonna say that there's a big difference between, okay, now get up on this bench and I'm gonna go ahead and either tie you down. It's kind of very deliberate. Now you're where I want you, and now I'm gonna do whatever to you. It's completely different when I'm grabbing you and I'm throwing you on the floor and I'm physically dominating.
Yeah. There's sort of an element of taking or being taken that maybe you don't get in some other kinds of play. You're actually, you're not being asked to do these things. You are cooperating, but there's an element of, maybe, well, not for everybody, I guess. Sometimes there isn't an element of fight back, but I think in a lot of cases people sort of like to have a little bit of pushback from that to make it interesting, or to make it a little less one-sided, or to make it feel like a challenge. And I know that even some people who do this sort of as an erotic service, it's kind of like, yeah, you want some pushback, but you want to let them win too. So and you kind of have that with a with the bottom as well. It's like if they want the action that's coming to them or they want that feeling of being taken, well, maybe they can't fight back as well because they will actually turn the tables and kick the dom's ass down, you know. And you don't necessarily want that. You still want to fight back just enough.
To make it good.
And that could be, you know, hard to dial in. Sure.
I think that it's a pretty easy road. Like maybe one of the things that it appeals to for a lot of people is it is a short path down the road to like a consensual non-consent kind of a thing, or a like a role play kind of an element. It's just really easy to fold those things together, and you don't have to go through the elaborate, you know, scenario setting up process because it's easy. They just push you down.
Sure.
You can go a lot of ways with that. So I know a lot of people like it for that element.
Yeah, you don't need a whole lot of toys in your toy bag. So, you know, as long as you have a good place to do it,
You're set.
yeah, you're kind of good to go. So it's one of those things that, you know, I wouldn't say is like a beginner-friendly activity, because I do think that there's, you know, maybe for beginners that have a good rapport with their partner, I don't see this something that I would do a whole lot of pickup play with people unless like we both really understood what it was that we were doing and we were going to pull some punches a little bit. I don't think that we could really, you know, fully get into it with a stranger or somebody that I don't know very well, because it could really come across as mean, you know, playing dirty and kind of shitty for somebody. And then for somebody to have, you know, not just agreed power over you, but actual power over you, where they've pinned you down in a helpless state, then suddenly you've stepped on a landmine and people start freaking out and stuff. And it's, you know, I think it takes a little bit more, at least for me, it would take a little more trust with the person that I'm playing with. But the fact that you don't need a whole lot of equipment, you just kind of need a, you know, a safe space to do it, I think kind of makes it one of those, it could be like a go-to, you know. Well, we didn't bring our toy bags, but we'd like to have a scene. Or we're in a hotel room, you know, and we weren't expecting to have some kink, but we're both feeling it, you know, so that is something that you can do without being all kinds of prepared for it. Now, if you start, like, kicking the walls and stuff like that, you're going to get the neighbors after you, and maybe, you know, the owner of the hotel coming up and seeing what the hell's going on.
There's a lot of yelling. Yeah, it's going to sound a lot like...
It's going to sound a lot like what it is, and that could be alarming.
Yeah, but it's fine. You know, you answer the door with a smiling face, and you say, sorry about that, we were fucking. Yeah. It's not like you're the first person in a hotel to do that, okay?
Right.
No.
I think, too, like, I don't think that you have to have... I don't want to give people the impression you have to have, like 10 square feet of mats in your area to be able to engage in this kind of play. Like, you don't have to run all over the house. I don't typically do that when I engage in it. I find a bed or a couch to be perfectly sufficient. I have wood floors in my home. I've never broken anything on the floor, but I also don't usually get on the floor. We aim for furniture. And then there's various states of being on or off the furniture, but if someone's throwing you around, they should be being, you know, conscious that you have railing on your bed or, you know, whatever. But I'm just saying, I mean, it's fun. I mean, if you want to go be able to have a big square footage, you can. But I find that it is usually totally fine just to have a length of bed. Maybe not a twin bed. Maybe that would be pushing it. But, like, as long as it's bigger than a twin or, like, a couch.
It does depend. It does depend on how much fight back you're expecting.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. So I think you should, you know, be mindful of your space, but don't think you need a ton, especially if you're just learning. But that was the other thing I was going to say is if, like, it's one of those things, like, I would want people to try it, but I would also caution, like, pro tip, if you're afraid of getting, like, an accidental elbow to the face, maybe it's not for you. Because if you like the idea of, like, basically kind of fighting each other a little bit, like, eventually, let's be real, I'm going to let you win.
Something will happen.
You win, I win. But there needs to be a little bit of fight before that happens, and I think when you pull all of your punches, it's not any fun. So, like, I am going to try to knee you in the junk. Like, I'm going to do it a lot because that's just a way that I like to do it. It scares the person who's trying to tackle me, regardless of the kind of junk they have. And it just creates a lot of kind of body movement that I like. But that means that sometimes I'm a little bit successful. So if you're afraid of that, it might not be for you, because you will, like, at least one time have a funny story about that time that you got, like, accidentally kicked in the knee or, like, you know, elbowed in the face.
Yeah, or you actually like twisted your ankle and limped for a week.
Yeah,
Yeah,
did
or you
that
got a
too.
bloody nose by accident, like completely by accident. I was flailing my arm and I hit you in the face with my hand. Like, yeah, it happens. And that is not typically a concern when you're flogging somebody.
Yeah, but it's all love, isn't it? It's all.
Yeah, I mean, that your nose was totally full of love and affection.
All right. Anything else we have to add about rough body play?
No. It's fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we kind of got into the what's and whys, and you know, some of the things,
Sounds
and
good.
apparently, you know, I think more people engage in this activity than realize.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it's, you know, maybe at a little bit milder level, so they don't. That's not what they consider it, just kind of fucking around or something.
Yeah.
Roughhousing.
Yeah, roughhousing. That would be the, you know, sort of the casual term for it, but.
For me personally, it's not something that I would do usually at a play space. I don't want to say it's an at-home activity, but there's a difference between, for me, separating kink and impact or whatever I'm doing and roughhousing.
Yeah, and I think if you're doing it in somebody else's space, it's worth a small conversation with whoever's running the space.
Yeah.
Whether
And for
that,
me, it's a very sexual thing. It crosses that kink is kink, and I mean, it gets more into the foreplay type of.
right. So you want to be able to get down and get busy afterwards, and that's not always possible in more public spaces.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I can sit there and flog somebody, you know, all day long, and that's fine. That's just what it is. But when that element of body on body, and it goes someplace else, and it's just different.
Yeah, but it's worth a conversation with the host, whether it's the person who operates the dungeon, or the DM that's on duty, or the owner of the house that you're having a party at, because there might be spaces that they're okay with that. It might look to be non-consensual. It might look like, you know, if all of a sudden this thing breaks out in the middle of something, it may look like you're actually having a domestic, you know, like you're having a bit of a fight there, and they may not understand what it is that they're looking at. So a little heads up is good, especially if you don't want to be interrupted, or if you want to be respectful of people's houses and their breakables, or you know, other scenes that might be going on, because it can be a bit of a ruckus too. It can be distracting for other people when they're having this, you know, nice little sort of subspace experience with this impact scene going on, and then there's, you know, this kerfuffle going on 10 feet away from them. It can be, yes, I use the word kerfuffle. So there you have it.
Super hardcore.
Kink Tank out. Thanks everybody for chipping in for that discussion. We're going to move on to a different topic. This is something a little less play-oriented, and we're going to talk about punishments and consequences. So, punishments and consequences. First of all, is there a difference between the two?
Yeah.
Okay, can you put a finger? I've been trying to put a finger on this. What is the difference between a punishment and a consequence? Is it that a consequence is something that you already know the consequence of? So I've told you beforehand, if you do A, there will be B that ensues, whereas a punishment is something that's sort of off the cuff or not premeditated in that way. That's usually the way that I use those words.
That makes perfect sense. But I think in real life for us they're interchangeable. But I think yours makes more sense.
I think that's true. I think so in my mind, a consequence is a direct result of your action. It's like a cause and effect. But a consequence, like a punishment, is a consequence of your behavior. So, like, to me, they're two different things, because the consequence is like the phenomenon, and then the punishment is the actual
Alright, yeah.
thing if you're gonna get a thing. Like writing lines is a punishment. I don't know. In my mind, it's just different. Like, I know, maybe it's just the language that makes me mad, because, like, I don't respond well to punishments. That's not, I'm not into that. But I understand consequences. I understand that if I did this thing, the consequence within my power exchange relationship might be that this is going to happen.
But if you have consequences, do you ever go in your head and go, it's worth it, and do it anyway, when you already know?
Well, sure. Those are kind of like punishments. Those aren't really.
Well, and consequences aren't always bad either.
Yeah, okay, good point.
I guess, and maybe that's one of the differences.
Reason why, like, we're having, like, well, that's one of the things that makes them different.
So a consequence is something that
as a result of an action.
As a result of an action, but a punishment is patently meant to keep that from happening again or correct that behavior.
Discipline.
A punishment might be a type of consequence. But to me, I guess the way that I use those words, that was the best way that I could describe it, because a consequence is something that you already know. If I am late to this thing, you already sort of know that there's going to be a consequence to that, whether it's I'm going to be pissed off, or I'm going to react in some kind of way, or dole out a punishment or something like that. But it's like a known quantity, and it's something that you can even decide for yourself. Is that something I can live with? Because you already know what's going to happen. Whereas a punishment, I guess a punishment just seems to me a little bit more improvised, or a little bit more, it's kind of an unknown to me.
For the moment?
Yeah, or it's just that it's not something that can be anticipated. So if you say, like, if I fail to do my service for him, this is the thing that we've agreed is going to happen, or this is the thing that I know is going to happen. That's a consequence. But when it's something different that's like outside of discussion, or something that's maybe not explicitly detailed, then you're not looking at a consequence. You're looking at, I guess consequences can be designed for correcting behavior as well. So I don't know. We're talking about a gray area here, obviously. We're trying to figure these things out. But the way I'm just, and I don't even mean that there is a difference, and let me tell you what the difference is. I mean, when I use those words, that's really what I mean. You guys might use them differently.
I think if you're talking about a consequence, a negative consequence, that is more in tune with the punishment. But as you said, consequences can be both good and bad. So a punishment can be a consequence of whatever you did. But can a consequence be a punishment? That to me is where the distinction, I guess, kind of lies, is negative consequence can equal punishment, but a punishment can't ever be a positive consequence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's like the negative connotation is what makes it different.
Right. And I guess, and yeah, to sort of clarify, for me anyways, sometimes a punishment is a consequence, but a consequence is not a punishment.
Yes.
No, because like I'm agreeing. I think that like a consequence of me looking too cute could be that you want to have sex with me, and that's not a punishment. But it's a consequence.
That could be a very good thing.
But a punishment should be, in my view, a consequence of some disagreeable behavior. A punishment is not something you just do.
Correct.
To me, that's play. If you're just doing it, and I'm serious too. I think a lot of people.
Fun.
But I think a lot of people sort of conflate these things, and not separating enough between their play and their punishment, and they feel too much the same. Or in my case, for the first couple years that I was doing this, I was having issue with the idea of playing with somebody for the sake of playing, because I wanted to, that I didn't think that that was okay. So I did this thing where I would sort of set them up with gotchas, set them up for failure, so that when they fail, then they get the punishment, which is actually play, and probably didn't feel much like a punishment to them. And it was a whole bunch of crossed wires, because then when there might actually, be an actual punishment coming down the line, they're not like, is he really mad at? Like, are we doing our fun thing, or are we like, is he really pissed?
Is this a playful spanking or a punishment spanking?
Right. And I thought that it wasn't until I realized that saying to somebody, yeah, I want to play with you right now, just because, and I want to hit you, beat you, whatever, that was okay. You didn't need for them to misbehave in order to do that. I had associated those actions with negative consequences, and that was part of the baggage that I was carrying around. So for me to say, I want to play because I love you and I want to play with you, that was kind of foreign at the time, and I've kind of come around to that. But I see that happen, when people sort of play that way, and maybe they're still carrying some of the same baggage around that I was carrying around, a couple decades ago. But it feels different, or at least I feel like it should feel different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think some people, so I've seen this before where people have been confused, I don't understand why my punishments aren't working, because my punishment for my person, they were late when I asked them not to be, or they had a certain thing they were supposed to do by a certain time and they didn't do it. So then their punishment was having to sit on the floor while we ate dinner, and they really liked that, so they kept doing it.
Yeah.
It's a bad reinforcement of the behavior because you're giving them something that they like. So I think that's especially challenging, with a masochist. You can try to punish me with a spanking, but I'm probably fucking it up.
Or a brat.
I like what you're doing. So you have to pick things that are actually punishment. So that requires a conversation. So, if you're gonna ask me what kind of punishments I don't like if you put me in a corner and ignore me, I will lose my shit.
That is the worst.
I cannot. Yeah, the silent treatment will make me lose. That is not in any way pleasurable. I don't like that at all. And I can't. There's no way in my mind I can manipulate that to pleasure. It just upsets me.
No.
That or writing lines, most people hate that shit. It feels stupid. It makes them look stupid. So those kinds of things I think require a conversation. But you should pay attention to them if you're giving someone a punishment because it's fun for you. You're using the word punishment the way Michael was saying it. I kind of just want to play with you. So I'm hey. You didn't take out the garbage today, punishment time, and then that's part of your kink, go for it. But
but then they're going, yay!
Exactly. If your punishment is actually for behavior correction, you should have
that that's all fine unless I really want the fucking garbage taken out, because then it's probably never going to happen after that. Because they want playtime.
Don't negatively reinforce that.
And I'm not really much into bratting, I guess. So maybe that's why people that are probably get a little bit more of that, where there's a little bit oh, I totally just slipped my mind, or you're not the boss of me, I don't have to do what you say, whatever. All right, well, I'm taking you over my knee, which is really what they wanted in the first place.
Right.
And I'm not much into that. I guess if you are, then you're sort of in a different paradoxical land of you do mix up the punishments with the funishments, and you have to work out a way with your partner so that you can distinguish between the two, because I think it's important to distinguish between.
And I think it's something that you learn to distinguish. I think it's something that, like you said, when you first kind of started, you were doing these things for something, and I think it takes a little bit of experience to be able to separate that out and almost learn from those experiences to be able to actually get what you want out of it, but for them to get what they want also.
Yeah, I've dialed in a little bit more understanding the way that I like things, and I've gotten better at communicating that to my partner, so I don't have to deal a whole lot with this anymore. But I realized that my behavior was confusing, really confusing to some people, and So I don't really, I don't do that anymore. They're sort of, separate. We might have a little tongue-in-cheek joke about it or something like that. But, when somebody's being punished, they know they're being punished either because it feels like a punishment, because it feels entirely different than our play, or they're being told that they're being punished. And I think there's a value in telling people, that this is a punishment and this is why I'm doing this. And I think the reason why we allow punishment in our types of relationships is because punishment helps us get past some things. That I'm a believer in the idea of, if I'm going to punish you for it, I only get to do that once. It has to be over at the end of the punishment. It's not something to me that can go on and on and on, because
I'm going to punish you mad for the next week.
Yeah, and it's, I'm going to hold it over your head. I'm going to keep bringing it up. I'm going to keep recognizing your failings, etc. That once you're done with that punishment, and I think this is the reason why people agree to this. They agree to be under your power and agree to be punished by you, because when they screw up, then they don't have to carry that around with them forever. They take the punishment, or let's say the consequence of their action, and then it's done with. It's sort of a bit of clean slate. It's a new start that they can, do better and move past. And if you don't let them, then the punishment, I think, is a lot less effective.
Yeah, I think people who like this kind of element to their relationship, they like the forgiveness, like it's a good strategy for moving on, but I think it also has a lot to do with consistency and follow through and accountability. So I know that I actually did something wrong within the confines of like what we've agreed to have be the rules for each other. And then, I know that there will be some follow through if I violate those rules, because for a lot of people, I mean, they want to know that you will actually take them to task and hold them accountable. Like, that's a really valuable part of power exchange for a lot of people. So if the punishments are inconsistent, if they're not actual punishments, they're something that you like to do, like they lose their value. It sounds funny if you're not into that kind of thing. You're like, why would you enjoy something that you don't like? But you enjoy it because of the power exchange nature of it, not because it feels good in that moment. If
Sure. And there's
that moment, probably not a punishment.
Submissive type people tell me that too. That if I did something that was against the rules, and then suddenly there's no consequences because my dom's kind of asleep at the wheel, or he's a lazy guy, or he's just like, it can be heartbreaking that they didn't notice, or that they just stopped caring that this thing didn't get done, or didn't, that's even worse. They would rather take the punishment for that, and the fact that they don't get disciplined for it is a loss, and a little bit of loss for maybe the respect that they have for their dominant, or a little bit of loss in their faith in the relationship or the kind of relationship. So when you agree to something like that, it is kind of a duty that you need to be dutiful about. But I wanted to bring this up because I think a lot of people are under the impression that punishment comes with power exchange. And I don't necessarily agree with that. It's something that if I agree to be if I agree to defer to you, or I'm going to be your baby girl, or I'm going to be your bottom, I'm going to be your submissive, I'm going to be your slave, that you are tacitly then putting yourself under someone else's power, and punishment is game. Punishment is something that should be negotiated in two dimensions, really. One, is it part of the relationship at all? Don't you agree? Have you ever been in a relationship that was of a power exchange nature that you didn't feel like punishment was called for?
I don't. On the regular, especially on the bottom side, I don't respond to that in my relationships. I don't. It's just not a part of my power exchange at all with any of my power exchange relationships, and they're varied.
But I almost want to look at it and say, in the vanilla world, how many couples punish each other because they didn't do the dishes, because
Yeah.
you let them down, because they were disappointed, because, I mean, you didn't do something that I asked you to do, and now I'm going to be angry and upset at you for a week, or not talk to you, or give you the silent treatment, or whatever.
Yep.
It happens every day in almost every facet of every type of relationship. And so whether it's agreed upon and spoken and saying you're in punishment, guys being in the doghouse, having to go sleep on the couch, all of those things happen in not only vanilla relationships but our type of relationships too. So I almost disagree that punishment is kind of a common thing in any relationship, parent-child. You know, you're getting spankings for whatever, or I mean, it's just in almost every relationship, even at work. You didn't get this report done on time. Punishment. Dock and pay for being
Yeah, but
late.
see,
I mean,
I don't agree with that. I do not think that those, if they're not consensual, that's not the kind of punishment we're talking about. And also, I would expect a consequence. So if I get drunk at a party and I embarrass my partner, I expect consequences for that action. Like, I expect for them to tell me the next day once I'm sober and I've embarrassed them, for them to say, "Girl, I don't know what you were thinking, but you embarrassed me last night, and we need to talk about it because I don't want that happening again." If they were to spank me for that behavior, I would be pissed the fuck off. If they
so
were
is that the
to tell
difference
me
then?
they're upset, I accept that consequence, and I expect that consequence. And honestly, if I didn't get that consequence, that would feel like they weren't holding me accountable in a way that I expect my partner to.
So is that the difference then between consequences and punishments?
Yeah, I think that's like, I can't articulate it outside of examples, but like, to me, that's it. That's the difference.
Yeah, and when I'm talking about punishments that happen in a sort of DS sense, it might be the silent treatment. It might be the loss of privileges. It doesn't have to be a proactive spanking or something physical or something like that. But it is, to me, it should be agreed upon that that is what you're doing, that I have the power to punish you. Um, so if I've not negotiated that, or if that's not something that I've, you know, I think it goes unspoken too frequently, I guess, that people feel like, well, I'm a submissive and I wear his collar, so that comes with the territory, the power to punish. And I feel like, no, that's something you guys should talk specifically about. You can wear that collar, you know, you can design your relationship the way that you want it. And if being, someone submissive or being someone slave, if that automatically includes punishment for them, but doesn't necessarily for you, then that's something you guys need to work out. That's something you need to talk about. It's going to cause a conflict or a problem down the road. Because I've had that in my case where, people sort of saying, well, what is this? Like, when people ask, what do we call this? Am I your girl? Am I your submissive? Um, and we didn't have a punishment agreement. It was sort of like, that wasn't on the table. They didn't want punishment from me. That doesn't mean that there won't be consequences. I mean, there's consequences in everyday life and vanilla relationships. They're just a fact. But, actual punishments where I say, I didn't like that behavior and I'm going to punish you to, correct that behavior. That's a different thing, and they didn't agree to it. But I would kind of had to think to myself, to me, in my mind, when you use a word like submissive, it does kind of come with the territory. Like, I have a hard time calling somebody my submissive if punishments are not put within my power. You know what I mean? We can be something else, and there can be power exchange between us. But for me, the word submissive implies that. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be negotiated. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be talked about or agreed upon. But I was looking at it the other way. It wasn't like, you're my submissive, therefore I have the right to punish you. It was, I don't have the right to punish you, but so I'm not sure if I'm comfortable calling you that. But that's just in my head, in my ideas of what these words mean. And that might not be for everybody. You could be somebody's slave and not have a punishment agreement. that wouldn't really work for me, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't work for somebody else. What I'm saying is people just kind of assume that when somebody has power, or you give them power, you give them deference, that along with that comes the power to discipline or punish. And I think that's a mistake. You should talk about it. You should agree to it. You should come to an agreement. And if they say, yes, I want you to correct, and maybe they're allowed to, define the boundaries of that. So, for instance, I will not tolerate the silent treatment or being left alone in a corner and ignored. That's a hot button for me. That can't happen. But there are many other punishments that you can use to correct my behavior. That's a good conversation to have.
Yeah.
I also feel like when we're talking about different dynamics, when I'm involved with somebody and they give me power, they defer to me, they let me lead, I manage things, I'm sort of making the decisions, and maybe they serve me in small or even in large ways. That doesn't entitle me to punish them. If we haven't had that conversation, and in fact, I kind of feel like at that level, like where we're at, I don't really have any business punishing them. We have this like cool thing that we have going, but what have I really earned by that point? Have I earned that right to discipline and correct behavior? Because I feel like it is something that is earned and not necessarily earned along with the rest of the relationship. I guess that's my point. How do you guys feel about it?
Confused.
I
Okay.
agree with it. I think that, I would still expect for that to be a conversation. So just because we have a conversation about a power exchange relationship, I wouldn't then assume those rules fall into place. I think they're just really individual. You have to figure out where they go. I would, however, expect consequences. But I expect those in any relationship that I have. I expect them particularly in power exchange. But I think that if you don't have consequences of behavior in a relationship, your relationship probably isn't very functional. They're just a natural behavior that people have. Those consequences are not necessarily, though, like organized, task-based punishments. They're just a phenomenon, like I was talking about, like a conversation that we have to then have, or a bit of a cold shoulder, or you're not getting any tonight. Like those are natural consequences.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm like in that sort of relationship scenario that I was talking about. I don't necessarily have the right to punish. There are consequences if I have expectations for that person. So that person, just by sort of we've come up with expectations, whether they were spoken or they just kind of happen. They do them all the time, so now I expect them. Or we have explicitly agreed that you will, manage my coat. You will take my coat off, you will put it on, you will keep track of it and keep it safe while we are out and about at munches or whatever. And then they don't do that. That doesn't necessarily, if we've agreed that punishment is in order, or punishment is something that is part of our relationship, then there very well may be a punishment for neglecting that duty or that expectation. But I think in the relationship scenario I was talking about before, it would more likely be an acknowledgement and a disappointment. And that's a consequence. I'm not going to be happy about it. But I was paying attention, and I noticed that you slipped. And so that they may consider that a punishment. That may be punishment enough. But the consequence is that I'm not happy about it. And, I guess if it happened too often, I'd have to reconsider whether that was something that was going to be a thing for us still. But whether I could actually, take out a switch and, take it out on their ass, that's something that I feel like should have been negotiated. I don't necessarily have that power.
Yeah, and it's kind of a grown-up thing to give room for that. Like I would question your skills as a topside player if you made that assumption, or if you got all bent out of shape that it just wasn't a part. Like if you don't have the room for that flexibility, I personally would find it to be not an attractive quality in a top-oriented person.
Mhm. And when people look for those gotchas, you didn't do my coat thing that we talked about, so I'm going to beat on you. That's sort of reminds me of what I was saying the way I used to be. You sort of like looking for that so that you can get your play done. And in that case, it's not really a punishment. It's an excuse to play so that you can justify hitting somebody. And I don't really like that. It doesn't, that doesn't work for me anymore, and it doesn't feel right to the people that I'm doing it with. So let's talk a little bit about that, the difference. How does a punishment feel different than play? And maybe the sort of bottom type people in this conversation can tell us a little bit about that. I mean, some tops, I understand, they say I don't play when I'm angry. I don't play in anger, because then I think the sentiment there is often that it's going to come across as punishment when it's really just play. It's a good thing, but it's going to feel kind of like a bad thing, and I'll confuse my person, and it won't end up being a good experience.
Yeah. I definitely feel a difference between punishment and play. It's like when it's punishment, I feel like I have a knot in my chest, which is really hard to explain. But I feel a difference. So I don't know where to go with that.
Yeah, I would not get sexy feels. That's the difference for me. If we're playing, I get sexy feels. If I'm being punished, I feel terrible. I feel like I feel guilty, and I feel like I was bad, and I just feel very, very upset with myself. And I think that I think that a punishment should be that you don't get to play, not that you get to play, because it confuses that message.
Yeah.
And also, if you're tricking me, if you're like pretending it's a punishment and then like just because you want to play with me, it would really kind of turn me off. I'd be like, really? That's like the least top B thing that you could possibly do, because if our power orientation says that like I'm yours, but you have to trick me to play with me, I don't like that. That's not hot. Just kind of would make me sad.
Well, people do enjoy those dynamics, the whole bratting thing. Some people are really, really into that.
But that's different. If we both agreed that we were going to brat and have a fake punishment, that's cool. But if I figure out along the line that you keep like, if you're like sitting there and you're like, oh, you know what, punishment time, you didn't hand me the remote, and I'm like, wait, but you didn't ask me, and then I'm confused, and then you're like, yeah, playtime, I'm going to notice at a certain point, and it's not the same thing. It just is awkward.
Yeah. Gotchas are no fun like that.
Unless they're like the pre-agreed upon, you're like, oops, I dropped this. And then they're like, yeah, what did I tell you about dropping that? And then, haha, let's have a scene. That's fun.
Sounded like a bad
I'm not
porn.
knocking that at all.
It sounds very much like a bad porn.
Yeah. And it could be really, really fun, guys. But
yeah. Well, and some of the things too, I think, when I'm talking about setting people up to fail, I mean, you know what I mean by that? Yeah. I mean, it's really a predicament. If I said to you, we're going to a munch tonight, and I'm going to punish you if you use the word me. Okay, you just have to strike it from your dictionary, your vocabulary for the evening. It's completely arbitrary. There's no point to it, and it's really hard to do. I'm really just saying, like, why don't you just dispense with that and get with the play? Why don't you just say to somebody, you know what, I want to play with you because I like you and I want to play with you. And I found that I prefer it that way. Not everybody does, I guess. But what about this idea of enduring punishments, or the idea of punishments? I mean, isn't that why we do this? So that we can shake the Etch-a-Sketch, sort of clean the slate off and move on? Or is it okay to have enduring punishments? Is it okay to hang on to these things with people? What do you think? I see the wheels turning.
I just, for us, it's not really a thing. Because for us, playing kind of is like clean the slate kind of feel mentally.
Mm-hmm.
And enduring punishments would kill me. I just personally couldn't do something that was super long.
Okay.
But we also do more of the ignore punishment versus the actual physical punishment, because the ignore punishment will make me cry faster. So it's...
Well, and I've done the enduring punishment thing before, but it's not a proactive punishment, really. It is a loss of privilege. It's almost like a grounding.
No.
You know, that you're not going to get play for a certain period of time, or you're going to do some,
No ideas.
I'm not going to allow you to serve me for the next 2 weeks or something like that. That it is prolonged. It's not an instant thing. Now, when that's over, then it's over. But it's not a 30-minute punishment that's over and done with. It's structured in a longer sense. I guess some people would respond to that. Some people would think that was the most terrible thing ever.
I think it's a really good thing that you brought up. Like, I hadn't really thought of it before about, like, the shaking the Etch-a-Sketch and, like, wiping the slate clean. But I totally get it, especially for people, like, I mentioned that earlier. When I fuck up, I know pretty much instantly that I just fucked up, and I am my worst punisher. Like, I sit there and just kill myself over that thing that I did. Like, what was I thinking? How could I do that? I just made you look bad. I just made me look bad. Like, I feel awful. Like, really, I wring myself out much harder than anybody else could. But I think I do run the risk there of, like, staying in that place. Like, because I'll do it for a week. Depending on how bad it was, this thing that I did, like, maybe I'll lose sleep for one night. Maybe for, like, a month I'll be moping about it. And it might be a really good way in a power exchange relationship for you to go, all right, so I'm going to punish you for this thing, and then after it, I'm going to let it go, but more importantly, you're going to let it go. Like, and also, it's kind of like I fucked up and I'm going to make it right, not by correcting my behavior, by correcting my behavior, obviously, but also, like, it kind of relieves the burden on me for you to say, like, the thing that makes it better for me is if you try not to do it in the future, and if you let me hit you with this thing 10 times. And then if I successfully complete this task, then I feel like absolved. Like, oh, thank God, like, he's happy with me. I did that thing. Like, I suffered through it. I cried. Like, and then now we're good. Like, you're kind of just helping me get over it. And that's a really nice thing that I think is a unique feature only Power Exchange can have.
Yes. And I think that's why some people prefer a specific and immediate punishment, because then there's that absolution. There's the makeup and maybe a little cuddle afterwards or something, but they kind of paid the price. It's paid in full and it's over with. So now they can move on and stop beating themselves up, as long as the top lets it go too. If they're going to hang it over their head for the next several weeks, you didn't really let it go, and you didn't really let that absolution happen. You're prolonging that, and that's a control tool that I think is unethical to wield sometimes. It's an effective one, but it's kind of shitty, if you ask me.
Yeah.
So some people might prefer that, but I agree with you, Josie, that there is such a thing as a self-punishing submissive, like a self-cleaning oven, a self-punishing submissive
exactly the same.
that requires little to no maintenance. It's nice if I notice that they fucked up, didn't do something, didn't meet expectations or something like that. Doesn't necessarily mean that I have to create consequences or punishment for them, because they're going to do that themselves. They're going to do that probably more effectively than I'm going to do that. They're going to beat themselves up over it. And actually, in that case, I sometimes have to spend some time convincing them that I'm over it. They're holding on to it for far too long.
I used to do that.
Yeah.
But that's a good example of, like, a consequence too versus a punishment. Like, it may be your agreement that when you fuck up, that you're gonna take a little time and think about what you did, and kind of make it right, however it is that you feel like you need to make it right. And then, that top-oriented person is kind of the keeper of the absolution. Like, all right, do you feel like you fixed it? Do you feel like you did enough? And then they just kind of tell you, good, now it's over, it's squashed. But like that, the consequence of that is that you enforce it yourself, and then I will tell you that you've sufficiently paid your penance, and then it's over. And that's less of a punishment, because the top-oriented person is not the person telling you what to do. They're just giving you the boundaries in which to do that, and then like telling you that, all right, now we're moving on, we're all good, and then we're just, it's like,
So you're
it didn't
not
happen.
absolving yourself. You're relying on the top to absolve you of the mistake or the original action.
Yeah, which is like the consequence of the behavior, but it wasn't necessarily a punishment. You punished yourself on your own.
Yeah, it was sort of self-imposed.
Yeah.
And then, in that case, when I've run into that before, it's kind of my job at some point to, let them know that I'm over it. I'm done with it. It's not a thing for me anymore. And now it needs to be over for you too, because now you're bumming me out. And now I feel like you're not able to let go of this. So that might be a good time for a positive reinforcement, a positive consequence. Ice cream and gummy bears, or something, to do something special, or and it's just sort of expressed to them like, hey, you can stop beating yourself up now. You've done enough. I'm satisfied. You felt as bad as I feel like you should feel.
Yeah. People forget that. Like it's kind of the most basic tenet of power exchange, but people kind of forget the value of that kind of like permission to be okay. Like it's such an easy thing that you can offer your person in your power exchange that you forget about it. Like, it doesn't have to be all that beating you until you're bloody because you forgot to lock the front door. It really can be as simple as kind of granting someone the permission to like be over it. It's done. It's done because I say it's done, because that person's in a power exchange relationship with you. They believe you. If you say that it's done, it's done. That is really, really valuable and really, really powerful.
As long as it really is done.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't tell somebody it's done and then continue to, passive aggressively. You have to have let it go first, I suppose.
I think that's abusive when you go past that, because they're looking at you as the keeper of all the good things, and you hold all the absolution and you refuse to give it for no reason at all. I don't think people really consent to that. You become abusive.
All right. Good talk, folks. Punishments and consequences. There you have it. So thank you to the viewership who tuned in to watch us try and work this shit out. And to our panelists who came to join us for this discussion. We'll see you in a couple of weeks with another topic, and catch you some other time.